ISIL has secured border crossings into Syria and Jordan and taken over more towns, giving the militants control over much of western Iraq. The latest ISIL offensive comes as Iraq's polarized political parties face a week of intense lobbying to form an inclusive government to try and unite the divided country. On Monday, United States Secretary of State John Kerry met with Iraqi Prime Minister Nuri alMaliki, who's agreed to a July 1st deadline to begin the process to form a new government. Kerry says it was a requirement for U.S. assistance in fighting ISIL. To get the latest on what's happening in Iraq, I'm joined now by CCTV's Tony Cheng, who's in the city of Erbil. Tony, thanks for joining us. So the Secretary of State John Kerry has held talks in Baghdad as well as in Erbil. What's come out of those talks?
Well, we think he's been here trying to get together the Kurds, the Sunnis, and the Shia government, namely Nuri alMaliki, and try and form a government that is cohesive, that can hold this country together at a time when it's very much under threat. The trip to Erbil was rather unexpected. We saw him in Baghdad yesterday talking to the Prime Minister, also Sunni leaders. He then left, went to Jordan. He flew back here, something of a surprise to many people, I think. But I think it illustrates just how important the Kurds are to this process. They will influence a very important voting bloc in the new parliament, about 20%, and they very much need to be on board if Iraq is going to stay together. But at this stage, Kurdistan is very secure, but it's also very separate. The Kurds have got the oil-rich city of Kirkuk is under their control. They've kept out, the Kurdish forces are the only ones who are really working at this stage. They've kept out the militants from their territories, and they're very secure, and one wonders at this stage whether they feel it might not be better just to separate completely from the rest of Iraq.
Tony, the United States has made no secret of the fact that it would like to see Nuri alMaliki go. Is that going to happen, and who would replace him?
Well, I think they've made no secret of that, but I think they've stopped short of asking him to step down. There was a very uncomfortable meeting yesterday. You could see Mr. Kerry shifting very uncomfortably in his seat, Mr. Maliki with a big scowl on his face. But we don't think the Americans at this stage are going to try and force him out, although I think they would be very keen if there was another alternative. There doesn't appear at this stage to be any one alternative who could step in and unite those three groups, the Sunni, the Shia and the Kurds. But I think there does have to be someone who steps in to replace Mr. Maliki at some stage, because he himself has forged on ahead. He's forced the Sunni and the Kurds out of the government. They need to form a government in the next couple of days, by the 1st of July. But one wonders how at this stage he can form that coalition. That said, Mr. Maliki is a political survivor. He's faced many challenges in the past. Maybe he can pull this one from the fire.
And Tony, turning to the fighting itself, what is the state of the battle right now?
Well, at this stage, as you mentioned there in your introduction, the forces from ISIL are moving across the west of Iraq or throughout Anbar province. They seem to have locked down most of the border crossings to Syria and to Jordan as well, and that's going to be a great concern, that they can now consolidate their control here and the resources they've taken from the fleeing Iraqi army in the form of weapons and Humvees, even armor, and they can now move freely backwards and forwards across the border with Syria to their other bases over there. So that's going to be an increasing concern. That said, government forces and the Shia militia do seem to be holding them on the border, well, on the edge of Baghdad. We've seen heavy fighting in Baqaba, but in the last 24 hours it appears that government forces have lost control of the oil refinery at Baiji. That's in northern Iraq. It's the main domestic refinery, and that's going to be very problematic. It's still rather unclear who's in control there, but it's been fought over bitterly, and we know that ISIL control the territory around it, so it's hardly surprising it's fallen to the militants, and that'll be a big loss for the government.
Tony, we're also hearing that Iraqi soldiers have been taking action against Sunni prisoners that was in the south. Are we now seeing both sides engage in attacks against civilians?
Well, we've heard those reports. There are conflicting reports about that. The Iraqi government said that convoy was actually hit by militants who attacked it. So it's rather unclear. But of course, at this stage, we've seen human rights infringements on both sides over the course of this sectarian battles. I think the concern is that this does descend into a sectarian war. We saw the Mehdi army, the Shia militia mobilized in Baghdad and cities across southern Iraq over the weekend. That'll concern many people, particularly the United States as well, who battled the Mehdi army during their occupation. And I think the sectarian element of this fight is going to be a very worrying development indeed.
Okay, thanks, Tony. Tony Cheng there from Erbil in Iraq.